Hello and welcome to another edition of Globetrotting 5, your capsule of the day's top international news. And today we are discussing the topsy-turvy peace negotiations in the Russia-Ukraine war. As you may know, the last 72 hours have seen a flurry of diplomatic activity over what has been described as a 28-point US peace proposal for the Ukraine war. Now, it was completely out of the blue that this peace proposal was pushed forward, and what surprised many was that most of the talking points in this particular proposal aligned with Russia's viewpoint. In other words, according to the US peace proposal, most of the points actually favored Russia instead of Ukraine. This obviously was hugely shocking for Kyiv and, of course, the European countries who support Kyiv. They were not even consulted before this peace proposal was forwarded. Hence, it led to a flurry of diplomatic activity to see how, if at all, this peace proposal can be modified and reworked to have a more balanced approach to ending this horrible war which has now gone on for 4 years. So, what was in this original US proposal that shocked so many? Well, first of all, it asked Ukraine to give up the entire Donbas region to Russia. Second, it asked it to reduce and restrict the size of its army. And third, it asked Ukraine to forget about NATO. All three conditions are a huge blow for Kyiv and does not guarantee its safety in the event of a future Russian invasion. In fact, it does not even address this current invasion that Russia is carrying out, including the huge destruction to lives and property that it has wrought. Therefore, such a proposal was never going to be accepted by Ukraine. In fact, when faced with this proposal, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had to go on record and say that this is perhaps the most difficult period for Ukraine in 4 years of the war.
Українці, українки, у житті кожної нації є момент, коли всім треба поговорити. Чесно, спокійно, без домислів, чуток, пліток, без усього зайвого. Так, як є, так, як я завжди намагаюсь говорити з вами. Зараз один з найважчих моментів нашої історії. Зараз тиск на Україну один з найважчих. Зараз Україна може опинитися перед дуже складним вибором. Або втрата гідності, або ризик втрати ключового партнера. Або складні 28 пунктів, або вкрай важка зима. Найважча та подальші ризики.
Ukraine may actually have to choose between its dignity and its closest friend, and that he would never betray Ukraine and never betray the freedom and dignity of Ukraine. Therefore, this was a very, very tough moment for Ukraine faced with this completely pro-Russian proposal that US had put forward, and also set a deadline of November 27 by which to accept or reject this proposal. Luckily, however, in the 24 hours after the proposal was officially made public, American and Ukrainian teams met in Geneva, Switzerland to further refine and make amendments to the proposal. And it is after this meeting that Kyiv and Washington expressed satisfaction with the progress in the negotiations. And in fact, crucially, Kyiv said that its concerns were now reflected in the modified framework proposal that is being considered. Simultaneously, again vitally, the Europeans put forward their own counter proposal to the American proposal. And this European counter proposal was much more in favor of Ukraine. So you had a situation where the original American proposal favored Russia largely, and then you had the European counter proposal that favored Ukraine. In fact, the European proposal increased the number or the cap on the Ukrainian armed forces to 800,000 from this 600,000 that was proposed in the American proposal. In the same vein, Europe also said that Ukraine's border could not be unilaterally changed and that Ukraine's sovereignty must be respected, and vitally, that Ukraine's decision whether or not to join EU or NATO should be a sovereign decision of Ukraine alone. Plus, it now seems that after the Geneva meeting, the November 27 deadline that Trump had set for Ukraine to either accept or reject the proposal is being deferred. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that progress is great. The two teams are negotiating, they are in constant touch. However, it will take some more time to tackle the difficult aspects of the framework agreement. As per reports, issues such as Ukraine's future NATO membership and territorial concessions will be discussed between President Zelensky and Trump. So those contentious issues have been elevated to a higher level between the presidents of US and Ukraine to take a call on. So what do the last 72 hours tell us? Well, the last 72 hours tell us that the negotiation process to end the Russia-Ukraine war has become a cat and mouse game between Russia, Ukraine and US. Of course, the negotiation process was never going to be easy. It is very difficult with multiple factors and multiple interests involved. Plus, Ukraine was never going to accept any deal that compromises its sovereignty and safety. Ukraine has lost far too many of its bravest and brightest in this war. It will be an insult to their memory to actually give up without real security guarantees. And essentially, all of this boils down to that: security guarantees. How can Ukraine guarantee that Russia will not invade it again? Well, the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, Russia was supposed to guarantee Ukraine's security. What happened? Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 anyway, and the full-scale invasion happened in 2022. So, what is the point of all this if Ukraine is not given real security guarantees? What are those real security guarantees, or what could be those real security guarantees? Well, NATO membership. Number 2, something like NATO membership. Number 3, foreign troops in Ukraine. Without these three, or one of these three, there is no real security guarantee for Ukraine, and there is no guarantee that Russia will not conduct another military operation against Ukraine in future. Finally, Ukraine wants this war to end. It has had 4 years of relentless bombardment and destruction. However, we don't know if Russia wants to end this war despite the losses Moscow has suffered. In that sense, Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, it is fighting for its people, it's fighting for its sovereignty. Therefore, it remains to be seen that in the ongoing negotiations for a just peace, can Ukraine, Russia, and US positions somehow be aligned, or at least brought to a point where a just peace is possible. And a just peace would mean justice for the victims, which is Ukraine in this case, and to ensure that Ukraine is never made to be at the receiving end of another war or another invasion like this. Only time will tell if we will get there. With that, I would like to conclude this capsule. Hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you.